Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Zach Meckler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I am joined today by what we call him, the Professor of Football. And I don't know if that's wearing thin on you now. You got a new Twitter handle out there I think we need to let all the listeners know about. At Coach Meckler, A1 Zach Meckler. How's it going, Zach?
Not too bad. Yeah, the professor nomenclature hasn't gotten to me yet, so it's still. I think it bothers a couple of my followers that have blocked me because of it, because they feel that it's a unnecessary thing, the self-appointed nickname. Even though I did not self-appoint it to myself, but they feel the need to get upset about anything that can get them upset. So I really don't care. It doesn't faze me whatsoever. I like nicknames. I'm all for them. But for my time in the world of sports, nicknames are always a central part of all of that world. So. I'm not fazed by any of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I don't know if you guys got you probably have some nickname for me behind the scenes I'm not familiar with, like Tyrant or something like that. But I really don't know. But yeah.
I'm not a part of any of them, so I can't attest to any of that.
Well, you know what? We call you the professor is I think it's more fitting. It's not like we call you Dr. Zach or Dr. Meckler or Dr. M. You almost sound like some villain or something in one of these Marvel movies. The professor I think is more of a fitting thing. But there's some people who take that really serious. I used to know, God bless him, rest in peace. He's passed away several years ago. It was a guy that I knew through soccer, and he wanted to be called Doctor, specifically Doctor with the surname. You did not refer to him by his first name. It was Doctor and then his last name, but he was a very educated man. I think he self-taught 14 languages or something like that he was aware with. I forget what his exact expertise was in. Very soft-spoken, uses a lot of big words and things of that nature. So, but of course, when you when you have all of these different degrees as he even had some, I think, that were honorary type degrees that were given to him too. It's just almost certifiable genius, I would guess. If I really don't know. Maybe he was, but you deserve. You should be demanding that you're called doctor. You earned it. Now we're not trying to call you doctor, whatever. But at one point in time, that was something that you were seeking out. And just to point out to any of the people who are like, well, what the heck? Why are we calling this guy the professor? There's people called the professor in football and things like that. It's just an SCU thing that kind of stuck over the years. Now Brian, we're gonna have to come out with a nickname for him. Although we do call him instead of grown ass man, we call him old ass man. I think Get Off My Lawn is usually associated with Brian. The movie Gran Torino comes to mind with a shotgun in the front yard. So that's Brian right there. He gets a little surly. I think we have a few other nicknames that go around, but your counterpart, the other Zach, who's been spelling out his name now. He used to go with Z-A-C and you were Z-A-C-H, and in order to align and combine your powers like Captain Planet or something. I don't know what you're doing there. He's spelled out his name, but we call him Flash every now and then, and he'll get a kick out of that he gets mentioned again. I don't know why we keep mentioning him. Does he do anything important? Does he wear any important hats or roles or responsibilities? I really don't know.
Oh, he has a lot of tattoos from what I know.
He's like our court jester. He's there to entertain us. So speaking of which, I don't know. I get entertained by some things that I read on social media, and typically that's how we come up with some of the topics that are here. Or even sometimes there's some good questions, comments that we see on YouTube or elsewhere where people leave them on social media that's spark different discussions. Or we're like, hey, we could talk about this for an hour instead of typing out 7,000 words. So speaking of 7,000 words, I wanted to welcome Travis as well to the crew here at SCU. He's a new contributor, and he's been pumping out a lot of articles lately. So look for that over on the website. That's one of your buddies. A referral bonus for the professor here. He brought along the professor's assistant that he's bringing it with some of the good stuff. So hats off to him. But anyways, the things we read on social media, part of that is I read. Well, let's start with James Conner. James Conner, if it really is James Conner, I don't know. It might have been Lou Ferrigno for all I know. We just see the photo of this giant, massive V-shaped back, and it's like everybody's like, "Oh, James Conner is making all these gains and stuff." Now you can't mistake the haircut, I don't think, or maybe even the tattoos. I'm kind of surprised he didn't have like one of those giant tribal tattoos or like some Gothic wording, something, or like something, a script or whatever on his back. He's pretty clean there. But if that is his back, holy crap. I mean, the guy's been putting up some weight and really working out, working hard. But you look in the comments section of people that are like, the only games I want to see is him playing 16 games. And, we really need to look back and see, because we just did the episode. I know it was me and Brian. You weren't part of the quarterback talk. But the overall offensive play wasn't just attributed to missing James Conner or missing or Mason Rudolph being maybe inexperienced, although some can be attributed to both of those scenarios, and as well as Duck Hodges. There was a lot of supporting cast that's been missing over the course of a year, and I think we all have a short memory exactly how all of this started off. And we're going to take a look at almost week to week. We'll see how mundane and boring this gets to look at. I don't know. I think it's quite intriguing to see where the Steelers were and the players that they had on the field when you start with a game such as on September 8th, 2019 at Gillette Stadium, Foxborough, Massachusetts. Oh, excuse me. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit. Steelers, Patriots. The game went about as well as it went over like a wet fart if you were a Steelers fan. So the Steelers they start this game. Okay, you got Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. I hate putting in just all the starters, but I'm just going to list what they have in the game book for the 11 for the first play, because they went out there with 3 wide receivers. It's not always going to be the case from game to game, but for the most part, the overall crew is what we're looking at here, because you're not looking at guys that weren't active like Joshua Dobbs or Sean Davis was injured and didn't play in this game, or somebody like that. And Fred Johnson, somebody we were real high on that didn't end up sticking with the roster through the entire season. So, right off the top, I'm looking at him. He's the top name. I might as well just go with wide receiver. Somebody who didn't stick around the whole season, Dante Moncrief. I think people forget in that game how many times he dropped the ball, and he had Ben Roethlisberger throwing him passes. So that one was that's a little rough, and you see it doesn't last for very long. You got all of the main components of the offensive line, although this will shift a little bit as we get into each game. You have Alejandro Villanueva. Boy, I can't talk today, man. And Matt Filer. They're your bookends. They're your tackles. Marquise Pouncey is in the middle of all this at center with Ramon Foster and David DeCastro flanking him to each side. You have Vance McDonald, James Conner, and then the other 2 wide receivers were James Washington and Juju Smith-Schuster in this case. For the most part, the defense doesn't change a whole lot. And so we're going to be mainly focused on offense, but I think it's important to note that Cam Kelly was the starting free safety in this game too, which tells you a lot about how it turned out. So as we go from one dynamic to the other, just real quickly, I'm getting short-winded, and I'll let you talk, Zach, but you still had Dante Moncrief the next week. Pretty much everything kind of stays the same. You end up, Cam Kelly wasn't there. Sean Davis was the next week. He at least tried to play. And you pretty much had everyone healthy, but another name that gets thrown out there, a guy that didn't end up playing the whole season with the Steelers, is Xavier Grimble. And he was on the field for the first play for the home opener the following week, September 15th, week 2 against the Seattle Seahawks. You still had Ben in this game, but he goes down and it goes to Mason Rudolph. And then, everything kind of goes out of sorts. So I guess where I'm going to start off with this is... Man, how can you have consistent offense if you don't have consistent lineups from week to week? I understand it's a team sport. I understand that you should be able to replace one player, but we're already looking at this in week 2, and I could already tell you that the guys who are going to end up missing time or not even being around by the time we probably get to weeks 8, 9, and 10 here looking through this. Dante Moncrief, Xavier Grimble, and then, of course, Ben Roethlisberger goes on injured reserve.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at how we see these lineups operate, in training camp, oftentimes the first team gets most of the reps together. You have a couple guys that will rotate in here and there, but predominantly you're getting the same core group of guys together, working together. And that also changes for a team like the Steelers too, much to a lot of fans' chagrin. You see guys go and get rested. They don't play at all. You see Ben gets his two drives in week 3 of the preseason every year, so he doesn't have a chance to really kind of build up with a lot of these guys. And you see other players potentially come in there and they get their vet rests whenever they need to. So really, the Steelers have been traditionally slow starters to begin with. Then you mix in the fact that you only really have a core group of guys that get reps together. That's why, a lot of times you see when these backup quarterbacks come into play, you see the backup receivers start to flourish as opposed to the number one receivers because of the fact that that's where the chemistry is. But when you have a lot of the starters still in there and then you have guys coming in and filling in those spots, chemistry starts to change and you start to see kind of some inconsistencies with what happens there. And when the Steelers didn't really get a chance to get off to the races at all last season in terms of their offensive production predominantly, you're going to have some guys coming in there that were never even getting close to getting first-team reps during the training camp and preseason. Fans might complain about that, but you go into the season with the assumption that your starters are going to be healthy. You can't go in there and just automatically assume, player so-and-so has missed time in the past, so we got to start getting our third-string player some reps because there's a chance he's not going to play. You go in assuming that these guys are going to play a full 16 games. Unless there's some issue with a suspension, they're coming off of an injury where they're going to be starting the season on the bench until they get more geared up, ready to go, like in week 2, week 3. But by and large, the first team reps, you're going to want that offensive line to get practice, as much practice as you can together. You're going to want that core group of receivers that's going to be in there playing with Ben to get the reps together. The second you have guys like Moncrief come in there and they start getting moved around, and obviously, his production was anything but desirable last year with the Steelers. And you have guys like Ben going down. You're getting Mason Rudolph going in there, and Mason got some reps with the first team and whatnot, obviously with all of Ben's rest. It was only one little tiny segment of opportunity that he hadn't really had a chance to build up that chemistry and get used to and acclimated to. Then you start moving around these rosters and lineups before you even have a chance to hit your stride like we normally see the Steelers do after about week 4, week 5 of the season. That entire progression changes, and you're kind of left sitting there wondering, well, now what? And I think that's kind of what we saw last year with some of these injuries, because it didn't take a lot of time for this lineup on offense, at least, to kind of start transforming from what we were used to and what we were expecting it to be, because we had conversations all off season, that offensive line was going to be what they were. You're going to have McDonald, you're going to have Connor, you're going to have Juju, James Washington, and Dante Moncrief. That was the expectation. And obviously we didn't get through the first quarter of the season, and that entire thing just pretty much went out the window in terms of the offensive lineup. Defense, I think, stayed a little bit more intact, with the exception of the whole catapulting and moving around before Minka came to town. But you can't expect that stuff. You can be prepared for it and have guys on the depth chart that you feel confident about putting in there. The chemistry is always going to be impacted when your starters end up going down in any capacity.
Yeah, for sure. And a name that's, we'll see if this name ends up popping up here. I do think, not active. I'm going to bring him up before I forget about it, just to see if he ends up showing up in this list, is Roosevelt Nix, fullback. And it's a huge impact on the running game. You talk about the offensive line. I know he doesn't get necessarily a ton of snaps all the time, but Rosie probably, I'm looking at this right now. 2016, he had about 10% of the offensive plays. If we go to 2017, he was involved about 16% of the time. A lot of that's situational football too. There's games where maybe he didn't necessarily get on the field. Let me see. 2018, he was out there about 10% of the time as well. And then he actually doesn't make his way out into a game. He gets to play 2 weeks last season. We get to him in about week 8 and week 9, where the Steelers don't have a fullback, and then they're definitely done when he re-aggravates or whatever ends up happening that places him on injured reserve permanently from week 10 on. 2 games out of 16, essentially without a fullback. Now, they threw Tyson Alu out there too, and I'm going to get into some of these interesting numbers because I have the snap counts in front of me for the last 4 or 5 seasons and how many people actually played. I'm going to reveal that number for each of those seasons. You get 11 guys on the field, and I know there's some substitutions, but I think this one's going to really blow your mind when you take into account there were only 53-man rosters of active players, and then you only have 46? I always forget the darn number. It's active on game day. So you have a handful of players who are inactive. I'm looking at this week too. So somebody like Justin Lane, Roosevelt Nix was banged up. J-Ron Elliott, who got brought back on the team as an outside linebacker. Fred Johnson, who was an undrafted rookie. These guys weren't getting any helmets on game days. Chuks Okorafor, Zach Gentry usually don't have any need for the third tight end a lot of times, and Isaiah Buggs, additional defensive lineman. So a lot of that was fairly consistent. And these are sometimes the guys that are either they're it's almost like they're having a redshirt year, some of them, if they're rookies like Justin Lane, where you're only going to press them into duty if you absolutely need them. And the same could be said too. There wasn't any players who did not play out of the active set in week 2. Even Mason Rudolph ended up coming in and playing. And the Steelers had, at this point, I believe, only 2 quarterbacks on the roster. I believe they had just traded Josh Dobbs heading into that, or shortly around that week 2 area. And then Duck Hodges ends up coming onto the roster for week 3. So Dante Moncrief loses his job. And we had felt maybe, we had heard some reports that he got hurt in training camp. We were there the first 2-3 weekends, I think. I'm trying to think where we may have missed in between, because we saw him initially the first couple of days of camp when it opened up, and he and Ben looked tremendous together. Looked like, hey, this is going to be another weapon. Of course, Juju looked like this guy was going to be an all-pro. He looked stellar. He looked great. And things just didn't work out. And you had no indications that Ben would have been hurt. He was even who was that said that? I can't remember his name. Jay Glazer, that said Ben, doesn't really work out, doesn't throw the ball. Hey, look, he looks at it as his arm has an odometer on it. He's not going to throw a bunch of unnecessary passes in order to shorten his career. So the guy doesn't throw the ball in the offseason a whole lot. He gets some of those, like you said, veteran privilege days off during camp and stuff. But then you also see him have a little bit of fun. Him and Pouncey were out there about the 40-50, trying to hit not the uprights, but the crossbar of the field goal posts with the ball. And that was pretty interesting too. Pouncey's got a little bit of an arm. Maybe they could run a little trick play. You would love that as offensive lineman. That would be like forever. Your name would be in infamy. But week 3, the trip to San Francisco. This is when Mason Rudolph gets his first start. So he's inserted in the lineup, but guess who's yanked? Dante Moncrief on the bench, not even active for this game. Not a DNP, did not play. You had a DNP for Duck Hodges and Zach Banner. Zach Banner, as much as we got our yucks and our fun of him being named the eligible tackle, number 72 now eligible, he didn't play a lot in the beginning of the season at all. And I don't know if some of that was just based on not having the big packages out there. Maybe some of it was just, again, it's matchup based depending on who you're playing against. He played in week 2, but he was absent in these weeks 1 and 3 right out the gate. And he saw some more playing time. It was sporadic here or there. He ends up playing 22% of all the offensive snaps for the season, which is, quite impressive when he's not, a full-time guy for the most part. Most of the rest of this is vanilla here. It's what you should expect, the same offensive lineman. James Washington's out there. Deontay Johnson, this is really when he first got, and I believe this was his first touchdown, NFL touchdown in this game too. And the three wide receivers who started the game, Washington, Johnson, and of course Juju. You still have James Conner healthy. You have Vance McDonald, a guy that gets a knock. This is the one that really rubs me the wrong way, because when I pulled this up, only the main 5 offensive linemen played more snaps than Vance McDonald. And Vance McDonald's a tight end, and Vance McDonald had actually missed 2 games during the season. He only plays 15 snaps in this San Francisco game, which doesn't do any favors for a young quarterback like Mason Rudolph, who may need a safety valve here. Even for that matter, we talk about running back by committee. Let's talk about James Conner's snaps for a second here too, because eventually he's going to disappear from this lineup. But heading through the first 8 weeks of the season, the first 7 games, since there was a bye week in week 7, he only played 46% of the snaps in week 1, 54 in week 2, 68, 64, 80, which was against the Ravens in an overtime game. So there were more plays, more snaps to go around, period, because there's an extra period of football. You had he took 30 reps, which is exactly half against the Chargers, and then I think he had to shoulder more of the load against Miami, and that's when he ended up getting hurt. He played in 64 plays, which 64, you're starting to get up there to begin with, but that was only 83% of the 77 overall offensive plays that the Steelers ran in Week 8 against the Dolphins. So a lot of people that are talking about running back by committee, they attempted to do a little bit of this. They tried to get Benny Snell involved. They tried to get they would get Jalen Samuels involved in when he was healthy. Of course, he misses 2 games during this spell also, which shows you how many more weapons do you get to go around. He wasn't there for the Chargers or the Dolphins games when you get into Week 6 and Week 8. There's a lot. When I look at this snap count chart, there's a lot of holes where there's just blank spots here as I'm looking at this table. And this is why. You get a guy that's coming in for his first start, or this is why it's so disruptive to the offense, I should say. Deontay Johnson, he's a rookie. This is his 3rd game, and he's not even playing that much getting up to this point. He's played it's a career high, 79% versus 36 and 47 in the first 2 games. He's relied upon to start because the guy who was the veteran brought in that's supposed to be, shouldering the load here. Moncrief plays 90% of the game, very high with a wide receiver. He almost outsnapped. He is actually equal with Juju Smith-Schuster against the Patriots, and then he drops down to 18 or 32% because why? What happened in Week 2 against the Seahawks? Mason Rudolph goes to hit him with, I believe this was the game Rudolph hit him and the ball popped up and got picked off, although that could have been any game, really, when I'm thinking about Moncrief and his tenure in Pittsburgh. So, it's very disruptive here. You're inserting 2 new components into this Week 3 game. I know, and you're inserting another on defense. This is when Minkah Fitzpatrick comes in, and he puts his stamp on it immediately, and most people probably don't. I think they take for granted just how well he was able to just come in. Like that trade was on like a Monday, and he just comes in. Comes from Florida and flies up, and he's in the team facilities, and all of a sudden on the field in San Francisco, no less. With the it's not even a home game. The guy's not even settled. He probably doesn't even have a place to live. He's probably in a hotel or bunking with somebody else. And look at the way he played. And these are the other things that are kind of disruptors. I mean, Mason Rudolph's got to think about this all week now. Ben's on IR. All of this is on you. They're going to try and take it easy and not put you in a position where me and Brian were using this phrase on the last show, kill the team. And for all intents and purposes, that kind of worked out well, at least for the beginning with Mason Rudolph. But geez, you still got so much that's going on here in terms of guys like Moncrief getting benched or Rosie Nix being on the bench because he's hurt. That doesn't bode well and doesn't help your young quarterback or the overall offense for the Steelers.
It's interesting to me too because I always think back to Vance McDonald, and I'm sure the comments will be flooded again, just like they always are whenever you or I or anyone in SU talks about Vance McDonald. I think the biggest thing that people harp on is his lack of production last year because when you point out the whole snap count thing, at the end of the day, the only guys who played more than him during the season were the 5 guys that never come off the field at any play. They don't get a break unless they get injured, and those are the offensive linemen. Villanueva, Filer, Castro, Foster, and Pouncey. And the reason Pouncey had as little snaps as he did is because we all know the snapping that took place with the Browns game that led to his suspension, or else he would have been there. And then he got banged up in the Jets game, I believe it was, whenever we then saw Mason Rudolph get down whenever B.J. Finney came into the game, got stepped on and stepped into Mason, and you all know the rest. But you look at the snap counts with him. I mean, he's played 68.54% when it came down to the entire aspect of everything. And, in my mind, you're not going to see a guy that's going to be playing every snap anyway, because the Steelers don't use a tight end every single play. A lot of times when they go 5 wide or they bring in a heavy set, they're not always going to go with McDonald. I think had McDonald produced the way he produced the year before, fans wouldn't be harping on the injuries. Because at the end of the day, since he came to Pittsburgh, there was the issues with his injuries in 2017. He's missed I think it's 3 games in the last 2 years. I mean, he exited games injured. I think it was the San Francisco game he got banged up and he missed that one. He missed the ensuing week. And he came back and played for how many, 5 or 6 or even more than that straight weeks. Week 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Yeah, he misses the Buffalo game. Yeah. Week 14. Week 14 against the Cardinals.
14, and he comes back against the Jets and he plays 97% of the snaps. You know, I think the biggest thing with him is the fact that we're harping on his lack of production when he's there. But as you pointed out, there's more factors to everything that's going on with McDonald than just the fact that he wasn't there. You know, you looked at his chemistry flourish with Ben during 2017, the end of it, and then we saw what he did. He had his best statistical season in 2018, where he played 15 games. And so he had the opportunity to do this. Ben goes down. You're not going to see the same. You're not going to necessarily see the same exact version of Vance McDonald whenever he does go down. And then there's other factors that come in there. How are the receivers keying up? They're seeing more loaded boxes. We've talked about that. Whenever Ben went down, you see more loaded boxes. That means there's either more linebackers coming down. There's a dime backer coming down. That's going to make it much more difficult for Vance McDonald to even get open to lend to that productivity issues. And if he has a quarterback he doesn't have chemistry with, because how many snaps do we genuinely believe that we saw Vance McDonald get with Duck Hodges during the preseason?
Yeah,
I'm not enough to make it worthwhile. So you have a quarterback that's an undrafted free agent, or Mason Rudolph doesn't have the greatest chemistry and still wasn't the most accurate quarterback at times last year, trying to sift through all the nonsense and all the traffic that we're seeing with Vance McDonald facing these heavy boxes underneath, because he's not a vertical receiving threat. Next year, when they see Ebron on the field, Ebron's going to be the guy that they're sending deep. McDonald is not a vertical threat. A lot of the big plays we've seen from him have been dink and dunk. We're going to throw it under, and we just see him be a grown-ass man, stiff-arm guys like Conti from the Buccaneers, and just see him make something out of nothing. He's not a burner. He's a guy that sits in zones and he tries to find something. When that zones are all playing underneath because teams are stuffing the box to defend against the run because they're not scared of Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges. That's going to be a direct reflection of Vance McDonald's productivity. When you look at the snap count production that Vance McDonald had, he played the sixth most snaps on offense, only behind the offensive line, more than any other skilled position player. And there's other factors that go into there. Like I said, Connor getting hurt. Now teams are really going to take advantage of the fact that, because when Connor's healthy, you still have to respect him. He still is a hard-nosed running back that can be productive and do things between the tackles. Once he goes down, then you have guys like Benny Snell, who's a rookie, and Jalen Samuels, who doesn't really strike fear in a lot of guys because he had one big game against the Patriots on a bunch of outside zone and cutback type runs. You're not going to go and instantly start flooding. It's just going to make everything harder for all the guys around you. And once you have dominoes start falling here and there, everyone is going to be directly impacted by that, regardless of how talented or not talented you are. And it's all circumstantial in my mind. I think a lot of times if players get banged up and we have these stigmas against them that they get perpetually banged up for whatever reason, and then instantly that becomes their issue, no matter how productive they get. I was on Twitter recently and I saw, all the stuff with J.J. Watt and how he's not planning on signing an extension. Texans fans are sitting there saying, well, who cares? He's never healthy anyway, blah, 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 as if he's not a 3-time defensive player of the year for them and not a future Hall of Famer. I understand the issues with these injuries, but there's very few players in the league that play 16 games. Very few players in the league that play 16 games. And I think what you do on the field speaks volumes to what you can do. I think that's why a lot of times we see these guys get these second contracts even when they have some injury issues because they're productive. I think of a guy like Ryan Shazier. Ryan Shazier was playing at a defensive player of the year level for 2 years before he had his unfortunate spinal injury. He was missing games every season as well, but no one seemed to care because he was productive.
Well, I don't know about that. At first, they were saying he was made of glass too. They had to make him a safety because you need to protect him. Remember all that?
Yeah, and then instantly in round one, I think it was 2015 or 2016. I think it was end of 2015, 2016. In the playoffs, we started seeing what he can do, and everyone's all of a sudden, oh well, whatever, because in 2016 he played 12. He's played 12 games, 13 games.
Yeah.
2015 he played 12 games. Obviously in 2017 he was playing a full season until he got hurt at the end of the year against Cincy. But, we make these narratives about these guys because we're trying to make ourselves look for scapegoats. And when at the end of the day, in a perfect world, your entire starting lineup will play 16 games or at least 15 games or whatever. That's not feasible. Injuries are the one guaranteed thing in the world of sports, but particularly football, where you have these guys bang into each other at full speeds at, these massive guys that are doing things that humans shouldn't be doing. They're going to get hurt eventually, and your body's going to get wear down. And for some guys, it happens more than others. But when you start having a cascade effect of all these guys getting hurt at once, something is going to give, and that's going to be the productivity of the players there. I think even if Ben stays healthy last year, there was inconsistent play. The Steelers, I still think, are going to have some issues to face because Ben doesn't have chemistries with guys like Deion Kane. He doesn't have chemistries a lot of times with guys like Johnny Holton and whatnot. So you're going to have issues with that and the whole communication aspect because he's just not used to getting with them.
Yeah.
So, you start having these dominoes fall, like I said, you're going to have something give. But I think the productivity of a player like Connor or McDonald is why they get harped on as much as they do with their injuries. Because last year especially, I'm not putting that all on McDonald when he did play the sixth most snaps on that offense of any player and the most of any skilled player. And he just had the issues with chemistry, loaded boxes. He's having issues finding space in the zones and quarterbacks that just couldn't or wouldn't get him the ball.
Yeah, and you know what? Mason ended up finding him for 2 touchdowns. It was a perfect game for McDonald, catching all 7 of his targets, but only 38 yards against the Seahawks in Week 2. He disappears Week 3, just targeted twice with 1 catch for 10 yards against the Niners. And then we're going to get to this Ravens game here in a second where he had 3 for 34. It was the OT game, 1 catch for 5 yards when Duck Hodges comes in as the quarterback on the road against the Chargers after Mason gets hurt. He was actually Vance McDonald here was targeted at least 7 times in like 4 games, so a quarter of the season. But go back and look at like Heath Miller. Heath Miller, I understand he has because of longevity and because of he didn't always play all 16 games either. For the most part, though, he was largely available. I just think that's the thing was you get used to a guy like Heath, where Heath was the only guy really on the field. I don't think anybody remembers any of the other tight ends like Matt Spaeth, for example, that were out there because he never threw the ball at Matt Spaeth. So he was there just to be a blocking tight end. And everybody feels, they never replaced Heath Miller or this and that. But Heath himself wasn't really a perennial Pro Bowl guy that put up gaudy numbers. He was very much a utility guy, perfect to find on third down, sure hands, could break and run over people too. And as he got up there in the years in the league, he started to miss some games and things of that nature. And how often, this is the thing too, you just kind of painted the picture for it, but I don't think we just came straight out and said it. How often is Vance McDonald playing hurt? He's out there playing injured. How much does that affect his play too and his performance? You know what I mean? And how many snaps he could log. He's going to come off the field, maybe he has like a taped ankle or something. That might not be the injury per se, but just to illustrate that, it's just like, geez, maybe you got to get retaped to halftime or, just need a breather for a second. The coach has got to be able to sense this and pull the trigger on it too and get guys, cycle them in and out. And this kind of happens, real fast too, where in Week 4 against the Bengals, the Steelers acquire during the week another tight end because apparently the backups to Vance McDonald, Xavier Grimble and Zach Gentry, they feel they're not ready, or they feel these aren't the guys that they need to have out there on the field. There was also another problem. They knew Vance McDonald wasn't going to be ready to play, and he does not play in Week 4. So they bring Nick Van Nett in from the Seahawks, just almost like off the street. This guy's got to learn a new playbook now. He's got to come in from the West Coast, adjust to East Coast time and all of these different things. And they have to lean on him to play 75% of the offensive snaps in that game. He plays 44 of the 59 plays. And I'm sorry, you know what? Xavier Grimble doesn't play in this game either. I mean, who else did they have? Probably Gentry. Gentry plays 25 snaps, which is by far the most he plays the entire season. I mean, he played 10 snaps against San Francisco, getting thrown out there, I imagine, because McDonald has to get a breather. He only ends up playing 15 snaps, or 28% the week before. So Gentry gets kind of thrown to the wolves, too. He doesn't end up playing in Week 5. He plays a snap in only one snap over the course of, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, geez, like 10 games here. And then he plays like 14 snaps Week 15 against Buffalo, doesn't play in the last 2 games. And I get it. He's a rookie. We already knew being a 5th-round pick he was going to be raw, and this is a guy you got to develop. It's not a guy you're trying to jump up from third string right to be in a starter's position. And that's where the Steelers also struggled with. I know that you get some criticism. Well, they don't know how to draft. But everybody loved Jesse James. Why? I hate to say it. A lot of the Yinzers are from Western Pennsylvania, and they're Penn State fans. You get a confirmation bias in the same way that I like my Ohio State Buckeyes. You know what I mean? Or you like your Clemson Tigers. It's just... we get that way. We have our favorites, but it doesn't mean that they're necessarily the greatest thing that's since sliced bread, unless it's a Little Caesar's pizza, of course. So, Nick Vannett comes out here. Let me see who else we got that's changed in this lineup. This is the game the Steelers finally win after starting 0-3, by the way. So you still have Deontay Johnson, James Washington, Juju, Mason Rudolph's the quarterback. James Conner is still healthy. You still have your usual suspects with the offensive line. Nick Vannett is inserted into the starting lineup immediately, and he's out there 75% of the time. Dante Moncrief actually does show up back on the field in this game as well. You had a couple DNPs, obviously, were like Duck Hodges. Justin Lane actually got a helmet for this game. But you still had inactives such as Roosevelt Nix. We mentioned Vance McDonald. Even on defense, Vince Williams didn't play in this game. So, there's some things that are still getting juggled. And I think they were really hoping that they didn't have to put Rosie on IR and he would be healthy and they'd be able to bring him back. So the Steelers do win this game. They go to the OT fiasco where, Earl Thomas knocks Mason Rudolph out in the third quarter. Duck Hodges has to play. Everybody that's available gets in this game, and it's pretty much the same exact lineup at this point, but it's about to get shuffled more than once. You're going to move on to week 6, which is a Sunday night primetime game with an undrafted street free agent. I don't even know you call him a college free agent. He was a rookie, Duck Hodges, and he's not from one of these Power 5 schools or Power 5 conferences. You know what I mean? Not a Big Ten guy or an ACC guy. He comes from Samford, not Stanford, Samford. And nothing against that man. He threw 40,000 yards in college or whatever was a ridiculous number. Don't quote me on that one, but I know that Samford, those guys, they run the air raid offense. We were praising some of it and why he looked sharp and things like that in training camp, but that's also against training camp and or preseason competition, and he has to go in there and hold the fort. But some people are going to be right about this. They're going to say the defense ended up winning some games. This is one where the defense won the game, and then conservative play calling almost lost the Steelers the game. Phillip Rivers was trying to get a comeback bid here, and then I think he was picked off. Was it Cam Sutton maybe or Mike Hilton toward the end of the game? But the offense, I think it was 2 Devin Bush plays or a combo of Minka and Devin Bush where the defense really set up the Steelers real nice. James Conner had a pair of scores in this game and things of that nature. And you get a bye week, and then you're trying to bring Mason Rudolph back to be the starter, which is what they end up doing. So just to give you some of this, so the game against the Chargers, Johnny Holton gets put out there now. You got Vance McDonald back, and now you have Devlin Hodges. So now you have Johnny Holton. Did Holton initially make the 53? I don't think he did, but I think it was one of those close ones where it was like the catch release type deal. He was let go for like a day and maybe brought back, maybe to the practice squad. And he's meant to be a taller, bigger, faster type receiver, but the spotlight really didn't shine on him for all the plays he didn't make as well. And once again, you got some inactives here. Obviously, Mason Rudolph was knocked out of the game. James Washington was not available in this game, as well as Jalen Samuels and Roosevelt Nix. So again, you have quite a few guys on offense that are missing time when you have yet another inexperienced quarterback who has never taken an NFL snap. Luckily, they get a much-needed victory, starting to turn this thing around. They have a 3-game homestand. It begins with the Monday Night Football game that was on my birthday. Very cool. You have almost kind of a similar lineup here. Again, the usual suspects of like James Washington's now back and healthy. Everyone got a breather, so everybody's pretty much healthy. Mason Rudolph's back. Juju's there. Connor's there. Vance McDonald's there. Devlin Hodges is the only guy that doesn't play, but Jalen Samuels was still inactive even over the bye, so they couldn't utilize him for any type of, gadget or specialty plays or anything. This is a guy that scores touchdowns. That's what he's done since college, and we've seen it, but the best ability is availability. He was not available in these games, so you can't lean on him for maybe using him in some type of play where you have like maybe a little outlet pass in the flat or a little wheel route or anything like that. You're relying on Connor, and you're relying on Connor more because you got a rookie in Benny Snell that maybe you don't necessarily trust the most. You're going to give him some snaps. He only he had 11 snaps. I'm not sure how many carries. I don't have the actual stats up. Hold on. But he, this is a thing where now James Conner gets banged up because you overuse him. You have him carrying the ball 23 times for 145 yards. He also catches 3 passes for 5 yards. Benny Snell gets 5 carries in this game. And now you're without James Conner as you go up against the Indianapolis Colts and the LA Rams to close out this homestand. And you try and bring Conner back against the Cleveland Browns for that short Thursday night trip that was up in Cleveland. And he gets 13 snaps and exits the game. And then he's gone for another 3 games before you see him again for that big Buffalo Bills game that ended up being flexed to Monday Night, or not Monday Night Football, I'm sorry, Sunday Night Football. It's just, this is so erratic. It's crazy because I know people are looking at it and it's just like, oh, no, James Conner. And it's like, well, look at everybody else that's missing here. You have no consistency around all of this, and now you're trying to work some other guys in who haven't been getting any type of major reps. Maybe you're still trying to figure out if Dante Moncrief's worth having around. Now you have Johnny Holton, who was called up and he's active and he's out there, and maybe you try and hit him deep or something like that. Nick Van Nett is still incredibly new to this whole process. There's all kinds of things that are going on. And of course, Paxton Lynch is out here on this list is inactive too. It just, I don't know. It almost becomes overwhelming looking at some of this. I'm trying to see. So we have the Colts game, and I'm trying to see who's next. Did we have any major change? Oh, here it is. Here's another shuffle in the lineup. No Ramon Foster. Now you go with B.J. Finney. And they actually had the 2 tight ends on this one that start the game, so Nick Vannett is getting out there almost immediately. But it was just, it's all over the place. And they didn't end up using Chuks Okorafor. He was active for this game. And most of the other stuff here is still about the same as applied just before that, with the exception of Dante Moncrief is now gone. He had to be gone by the middle of the season due to the whole situation with LJ Fort getting cut from the Philadelphia Eagles and a risk of losing that 3rd-round compensatory pick for Le'Veon Bell. So now you've gotten rid of your veteran wide receiver, for better or worse, because we're not sure what's good or bad here. But when you're working with guys like a rookie like Deontay Johnson, or even really, James Washington's still he's a young guy too. All these guys, it's a very young wide receiver core. You got to make sure not only the quarterbacks know what routes everyone's running, you got to hope that these guys run the right routes as well, not only just catching the ball being the primary thing here. So it's very sporadic, and I think it really sets up some of these guys for failure, like Mason Rudolph in this situation, or Duck Hodges, whoever's taking the snaps under center. You get Jalen Samuels back, but he doesn't have the largest impact in this particular game. It's just, I'm going to pull up those stats here in a second. I just had them. So Jalen Samuels, let's see. He gets 8 carries for 10 yards. Wow, that's really great, right? And you may have forgotten some of these names. It's great to bring some of these up. Trey Edmonds, 12 for 73. And Tony Brooks James gets 1 carry for nothing. Nada, zilch, 0. Phew. Man, now I'm starting to insert names. It's like, did anybody even blink an eye and remember Tony Brooks James was on the roster? I mean, not to insult the guy, but I mean, this is where they're digging now in order to find warm bodies in order to take some reps.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what I said about consistency. In a perfect world, you want to stay as mostly healthy. Like I said, injuries are going to be expected. You're going to have guys fall. When you start having these names pop up that they're pulling guys off of the street, they're pulling guys off other teams' practice squads, and putting guys into positions and shuffling guys around. That's terrible in terms of trying to develop any consistency. But in the situation for their team last year, what other choice did you have? You had to put guys in there when players start falling that you would have never have played before, because go on the street. So and so is a free agent. If there's that's always my argument. If they're such a sought after prospect commodity, they're not going to be sitting there. They're a free agent for a reason. Just because they were a hot name in 2013 doesn't mean they're going to be a good player in 2019. So you have these guys, you're shuffling them around, you're trying to find some level of chemistry and a unit that's going to work. And teams are now starting to get a feel for what you're doing, because at that point you can't have the same expanded playbook. You criticize Randy Fichtner all you want to. I personally believe there should have been more trust given to a guy like Mason Rudolph to let him go and try to use the playbook at its entirety. But it's not even just the quarterback issue there. You have receivers that are young inexperienced, running backs that are young and inexperienced, guys that weren't on the roster a month and a half before, that don't know the playbook to the full width that we know that guys like Ben Roethlisberger know, Juju Smith-Schuster knows, James Conner knows, that offensive line. You have guys like Deion Kane, who's a young guy who wasn't with the team. Gareth White.
I don't even think we've gotten to those guys yet. We're still.
I honestly, I don't even remember when these guys came in. That's the point.
I got a good feel for it. We'll leave the spoiler free so far.
Yeah. So either way, you have guys coming in that don't know the full width of the playbook, and you can make the argument, well, they're professionals. A professional NFL playbook is a complex thing. It's not like your high school playbook where you have 4 formations and 5 run plays and you can get away with a lot of that stuff. You have to go, and there's a lot of things you have to do to face different type of coverages, different blitzes you might see, down and distance change, schemes change, coaching tendencies change in a much greater width. And you can be prepared for that as much as you want to, but you have to be cognizant of the talent you have around you on the field. And you don't have that same chemistry to do a lot of the exotic things you would want to with a full starting complement of an offense that you had in the training camp and in the offseason. So that all changes the entire look of your team, the entire look and feel of your offense. And as I said before, there's no room for consistency, and there's really no room for chemistry, because you can't just build an entire offensive identity and chemistry as a unit in 1 week of practice when some of these guys went down at the end of some of these games. And then you have a short week or whatever. You can't prepare for that type of look. There's only so much you can do, and then go out there and perform to the best of your ability to do this. And, I think you look at the defense. Again, a lot of these names you're mentioning aren't defensive names. We saw Stephon Tuitt go down. And then beyond that, it was a predominantly healthy unit. And then what happened? We started seeing them take these massive steps forward because they had the chemistry building up. They started getting used to playing with each other and seeing the calls come out much more easier. The communication was getting much more efficient. You saw that unit taking off, and then you saw the offense taking steps back because you have these plug-and-play players that don't know the system. Some of these guys don't know their teammates. They don't know every player that's in their position room, and we're expecting them to go out there and perform the same way that Juju would, or James Conner would, or a fully healthy offensive line, or even Ben Roethlisberger would. That's just not reasonable when you have that many pieces being pulled out of your lineup on a week-to-week basis, and lineups being moved around as you're trying to put whatever semblance of a team and a unit you have together onto a field to try to get some level of production.
Yeah, and now you're halfway through the season, getting beyond week 9, and the Steelers somehow turn this around where they start 0-3, and then they're even 1-4 at one point. And all of a sudden they're turning the ship around, win against the Chargers, win against the Dolphins, win against the Colts, and now they're going to play the Rams. They're going to end up winning this game too and getting up to 5-4 on the season, which seems unthinkable considering all the things we just mentioned, but it gets worse before it gets better. It's the crazy thing. So you get the next block of games with the Rams, the Thursday night game at Cleveland, and then at Cincinnati, and then bringing the Browns back to Heinz Field where they win 3 of these 4 games. Obviously, the Thursday night game was ugly, and it was even ugly if you were a Browns fan. That wasn't the best football from Cleveland. They should have really stomped the mud hole in the Steelers that day. They really should. And, if the Steelers had any semblance of anything working in their favor, particularly on offense, maybe the game would have been a little closer or whatever. But going back to the Rams game is where they shuffled the offensive line a little bit and moved Matt Filer into left guard and bring Chuks Okorafor, the previously the aforementioned not active player or a DNP, jumps right in and starts at right tackle against this. I know what this is called. This is called the Aaron Donald factor, and this is why they were changing some things here. But for better or for worse, I'm not sure. Jalen Samuels is still the guy that's there. They don't have James Conner yet until the following week, where Conner returns for those mentioned 13 snaps only against the Browns, and then misses another 3 games until you get into the final quarter of the season here. So you look at that, the offensive line gets changed. Okay, You go to the Cleveland Browns game now, and now you bring the offensive line back to the way it was on a short week, and everything is, they stink out the joint. And you still have Connor back, but just very limited. Juju's still out there. Vance McDonald's still out there. It's still another one of these things where you didn't have Benny Snell in reserve. He's been hurt. In fact, Benny Snell at this point misses 3 games during the course of he misses the Colts, Rams, and the road trip to Cleveland. So we get to where I said spoiler free, because I don't care to talk about this Browns game, is the game in Cincinnati, which was it was a lot of fun. Ryan Lippert, one of our contributors, me and him headed down to that. He came up from Kentucky. I came down from here in Ohio, and we met in northern Kentucky, or Cincinnati as some people call it. And all of a sudden, it's like, who are some of these guys? It was like, there's another name we forgot about. Where the heck was that? Well, you know what? I'm going to go through the whole list of everyone that played. Because I remember specifically making a comment about this guy, Tevin Jones. There's a name that I forgot about too. Yeah, he was out there too. It's just like, wait a minute. Yeah, all right, I remember that guy. But you look at the Bengals game at the Bengals. I wore Mason Rudolph gets benched. I almost feel embarrassed. I had one of his jerseys. I had bought a jersey. Like I said, I carry water for these quarterbacks. I have a Duck Hodges one with tags because I got it too late. I didn't even end up wearing it. I will wear it during the preseason this year. I'm going to pull from my guy. All right. I like the underdogs. I like pulling for these guys. So Johnny Holton gets a start at wide receiver. Benny Snell gets the start at running back. That happened to be Ryan is a big University of Kentucky fan. So he has the Snell jersey. I have the Rudolph jersey, and, half the stadium's empty. And for the half that's full, that half is half Steelers fans, half Bengals fans, and another kind of crapola game where nothing really happens. It's just the guys that are playing in this game. Now, Benny Snell did get 98 yards rushing. Pretty decent. 21 attempts, 4.7 average. Kareth White, where did this guy come from? They pulled him off of wherever, and he's playing. Trey Edmonds, Jalen Samuels, and then, of course, you had some scrambling with Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges trying to escape a pass rush. You had guys catching the ball, too. James Washington, of course, had the big 79-yard touchdown. Deontay Johnson, 3 for 29. Jalen Samuels, 3 for 26. No Juju Smith-Schuster here. But you had Deion Kane with one big play for 35 yards. Tevin Jones, 1 for 9. Benny Snell and Vance McDonald. I mean, it's just none of half of these names weren't even there when we were talking training camp and otherwise. I mean, this is really like, you talk about no-name defenses, you know what I mean? This is like no-name offense. and let's not forget, Marquise Pouncey suspended for the whole Myles Garrett incident with Mason Rudolph on that Thursday night game. They had the mini bye, so now B.J. Finney starts at center as well. This is just so erratic. It's crazy going back and looking at all of this. So Juju has been banged up now. He's been trying to play hurt. James Conner doesn't play in this game either. Okorafor goes from playing to back to the inactives list. It's just, I'm here shaking my head. Now the bookend on this again is the Browns go to Pittsburgh, and you still have B.J. Finney as your center. Jalen Samuels as your running back. Deion Kane gets the start at wide receiver. Duck Hodges is now the new quarterback because of Mason getting benched the week before. Holy crap, man. You can't keep up with all this. Mason Rudolph just stayed on the bench, and we're lucky there weren't any more injuries because Patrick Morris got called up at center, and he got a helmet for that game.
I honestly, I'm being honest with you, I forgot that he was even on the roster last year. No offense to him, but again, these names start ping-ponging around, and it's unbelievable. A lot of fans will point to Ben going down being the thing, but obviously Ben was the big central figure piece of all this that gets the most recognition. But if you're sitting there telling me at the very beginning of the season that Patrick Morris would be getting ahead, and if anything happened at any point, he's going into that game and is going to be the center there, I would not have believed you in the slightest. I would. I know there's a point, an exercise that we did in the back channels. We were looking at the roster from like beginning of August, like the receivers on the depth chart, the running backs on the depth chart, the linemen, and then looking at it come week 10, week 12, week 13, completely different.
Yeah.
The guys that weren't on the roster, they weren't on a roster, or they were on a team's practice. You can't keep up with it. You can't keep up with it. I'm honest with you. Some of these names you're mentioning, I remember them, but if you told me right now, like pick them out, and do you remember this guy being there? I couldn't tell you when they were on, when they left, because there was just so much consistency with these guys being moved around. That was the only consistent part of an inconsistent offense last year, was these guys being moved around, being shifted up and down on the roster from the practice squad, inactive, active. You can't keep it straight. It's not make your head spin and the smoke come out of your ears in the process.
Well, and just think how immersed we are in this. And I talk about everyone having maybe a short memory. You jump over to the Arizona trip against the Cardinals, and Deion Kane's getting a start again, and Duck Hodges is the starter once again. You get Pouncey back, and Mason Rudolph still doesn't play. You still don't have Juju Smith-Schuster. You still don't have James Conner. Chuks Okorafor and Zach Gentry are still inactives entirely. You get some substitutions here with Kareth White. Johnny Holton, still your usual suspect with Nick Vannett trying to do some 2 tight end type stuff. Benny Snell is healthy and playing. Tevin Jones is still being floated out there. You get to the big Buffalo Bills matchup, the one that was flexed that had major playoff implications. You have your main 5 offensive linemen all in the fold. They come out 3 wide to start this game. Duck Hodges under center. James Conner has returned, but your wide receivers now are James Washington, Deion Kane, and Johnny Holton. And everybody just wants to talk about how much Devlin Duck Hodges sucks and you need a better backup quarterback or anything. I just wonder, does anybody remember the AFC title game several years ago against the Patriots where Ben Roethlisberger, who all did he lose in that game? Or he didn't have, Le'Veon Bell, I think got hurt like around the first quarter. I'm trying to think if he had AB for that entire game or not, but he was throwing the guys like Jesse James, Kobe Hamilton, DeMarcus Ayers. And what did Ben say after that game? The moment was too big for some of these guys, and rightfully so. Some of those guys did not end up making it back to the roster the following year. You look at this, and it's like, how can you be set up for success with guys that were on somebody else's practice squad or the Steelers' practice squad jumping right into 2 of the 3 starting spots? A guy who didn't even have camp or the first maybe 3-4 weeks with the team in Nick Vannett. It's mind-boggling. And then you have James Conner, who definitely is going to be rusty because he's just missed 3 games. He's probably worried about getting injured again, and guess what? He does end up getting injured again, or he's at least limited, I should say, because he ends up going out, I think, against the Jets. And doesn't play against the Ravens to close all of this out. So this Bills game, you can see why it ended up being the way that it was. Who all is you have Conner running 8 times for 42 yards. You have Kareth White getting a carry, Hodges scrambling for 4 yards. Benny Snell carries twice for 1 yard. Jalen Samuels twice for -1. Can't get the running game going. They're just going to stack the box. James Washington targeted 11 times. 5 receptions on 11 targets. Deontay Johnson, 5 from 7. Vannett, believe it or not, 6 targets, catches 5 in there. Conner targeted. This was like we were talking about dink and dunk. Johnny Holton, 2 targets, 2 receptions, -1 yard. How is that even possible as a wide receiver? Jalen Samuels, 1 catch for 5 yards. Zach Gentry, 1 catch for 4 yards. Tevin Jones, thrown at twice, no receptions. Deion Kane once, no receptions. Just absolutely wild. I'm going to jump right to these last 2 games so we could drill down and we don't end up making this too long here, Zach. Almost kind of the same situation here. Conner does end up playing against the Jets. Duck Hodges, this is the game where he ends up getting benched because he does have Juju back. He does have Conner back, and nothing's really clicking here. Deontay Johnson, James Washington, your usual suspects as the offensive lineman, and this is a game that the Steelers absolutely, they needed this one, and they couldn't really get it. Is it Adrian Darbo? Was that his name that was picked up? He was inactive.
Mara.
Yeah. He was picked up, and it grabs jersey number 82, out of whatever's left from all these guys that have been he's on here. I don't think he registers any snaps and doesn't actually show for my final tallies I'm going to bring up here, but it's worth mentioning like him and Patrick Morris are additional bodies that are at least there that are on the 53-man roster and could have potentially been used in these final games. They're there for practice and everything else. Chuks Okorafor, again, inactive as he is for the final week against the the Ravens. You have Juju James Washington. You have Deontay Johnson. Benny Snell's in the backfield. Duck Hodges is starting again because of the broken collarbone, clavicle, whatever happened to Mason Rudolph. James Conner's hurt again. You do have Vance McDonald. He seems pretty consistent and steady in these lineups. B.J. Finney is the center for this game as well. J.C. Hassenauer got a helmet. So this is crazy. I mean, and also guess who got a helmet? Paxton Lynch did too. These are that's like 5 more names on top of what I'm about to say when it comes to guys who actually play. The inactives were James Conner, Marquise Pouncey, Chuks Okorafor, Zach Gentry, and Darbo. So out of the 7 names that you got here, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, just 2 or 1? Oh, no, here we go. Artie Burns and Tazar Skipper. So you have 5 of the 7 were offensive players that were part of the inactives, and the DMPs were 2 offensive guys. You just had so many bodies that were out there. So running this down so you can get to – well, let me hear your final thoughts on this before I get to the actual number of guys who took at least 1 snap for the Steelers offense in 2019.
It's amazing, honestly, when you look back in hindsight, because it's easy – people are going to criticize, people are going to point, they're going to look at this podcast and still point, and that's fine, but everything is relative. You can't just look at some of these things in a vacuum and just say, well, it is what it is, this sucks, this player sucks. This was a very unique season for the Steelers in 2019, and one that hopefully we don't have to experience again anytime soon. Not even just with Big Ben, but with everybody on the roster. In a perfect world, you're going to have consistency. You're going to have starters go down. I don't remember a time where all 11 starters played a 16-game season, and if everything was hunky-dory. Someone is bound to get banged up and miss a game, and more times than not, you're going to have guys missing a couple games or a couple guys missing a game here and there. You just want to minimize how often that happens, so you're not shuffling the entire deck every single week. And it's sobering. I'm interested to see the number you pull out here, but it's sobering to me to think about the fact that there was that many guys that played, and it wasn't because they were coming in for different sub packages. It wasn't because of the fact that the Steelers were up big in a game and they were just putting other bodies into the game. It was the fact that they had no choice but to do that if they wanted to have any type of offense on the field. And obviously fans will say that there was no offense on the field and they were better off playing nobody out there, just putting the defense out in all 3 phases. But you have to do something as a coaching staff, and you have to adapt. And it wasn't pretty a lot of the time. It wasn't productive most of the time. And in my mind, last year, it's not a big deal to me that the defense had to carry that offense. If that's what it took to try to stay competitive in these games and claw your way to 8-8, then so be it. That's hopefully not going to be the case, because I think any level of balanced play with at the quarterback position and just overall with having most of your guys hopefully stay healthy, that's going to be a huge difference maker. Even if the Steelers' offense isn't what it has been in some of the years when they've been healthy with guys like Ben and Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown, even if it's not at that level, consistency and chemistry will get you a long way. And that was severely lacking at a lot of points last year. And there's no real finger blame. You can't point the finger at a lot of coaches for that. You can't point the finger at the players for that. That's not a natural thing. If you've never been in that position to really understand how chemistry works, when you're not familiar with the guys around you, and then you're expected to go out there and compete against the team that maybe is at 95% health and they're only missing 1 or 2 starters, and they've been playing together now for 10, 12, 13, 15 weeks, you're going to have a hard time no matter what you have there, because you can't just do that. That's not something you can just snap your fingers and say, voila, here it is. And the notion that we should expect undrafted free agents and these guys to come in there when your starters and then your backups and then potentially even sometimes their backups are getting banged up and hurt. That's not – you can look at injury prone all you want to and say these guys are injury prone. They need to be tougher. Back in the 70s, guys never missed games, blah, 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 whatever. Guys are going to get hurt. Guys are going to get banged up in this kind of a sport. You just don't want to see it happen to the magnitude in which it happened in 2019. That was a very unfortunate cascade of events when you look at how everything panned out. If your starter gets down, your backup stays healthy for the rest of the season, and hopefully your starter comes back, and then you're good to go. But when you have, like I said, third-string guys, you have guys that were from the AAF that were barely on the practice squad, got signed to the practice squad, then getting called up and getting a hat on a Sunday. you have to expect what you're going to get from that. And the only reason you even sign them as opposed to a guy that's completely off the street is because at least the guy that you're signing from the AAF that was with you in camp and then was in the practice squad for a couple weeks, at least has been within the system for a couple weeks. That's why the Steelers signed those guys as opposed to continuously going outside and getting street free agents that haven't played at all in any capacity this season and certainly haven't been with your team. At least you're getting some semblance of chemistry and some semblance of familiarity with the player and how they're going to fit with the team. But that can only get you so far, and to expect anything beyond that, than expecting the Steelers to be a 12-4, 13-3, 10-6, 11, whatever team with that, the fact that they clawed their way to 8-8 with that type of mixed deck on offense, to me, is at least somewhat commendable. I'm not going to say it's amazing. I'm not going to say it's awesome, but it's commendable that they were at least able to claw their way to that point with all of the perspective you have now sitting back months removed from the season and can look game by game and see how much things actually changed. Because I think, like I said, in my mind, it's sobering to actually see those names on the sheet and how it all turned out for them.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. If Brian were here, he would say absolutely. Wow. I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. What I was about to say is like, and this team went, and he's still got 8 games, and people were upset that they were able to be in playoff contention with. I mean, come on, it was such a ragtag group. I mean, I should have just threw in the towel, put up the white flag when they had to face Buffalo. I mean, that's about where they were, and somehow Mike Tomlin and company, not only the coaching job they had, the guts that these guys had to go and get someone like Deion Kane and get someone like Kareth White, and the trust they put in and the work they put in to get them up to speed to eke out a victory or two with these guys getting like 3 days of practice. You know what I mean? It's like, wow. I mean, and then people still want to complain about the job that Tomlin does. And it's like, well, we'll get to that in a future episode. Trust me, because the guy doesn't get his due, inside or outside of Pittsburgh for that matter. So I went back to 2015 here, Zach. And in 2015, so this is every player, and I've been keeping track of these. I've been keeping track of the snap counts. I get them. I know some people may see some stuff online. I don't know where they get those stuff. Everything of mine comes from the NFL game books, usually like a day or two after the game is played. If there's any adjustments to it, then so be it, because I don't go back and retroactively do an audit on these. So it's fairly close, but it's everyone who takes a snap on the offensive side of the football. Remember, there's 11 players on the field at any given time unless you want to be penalized, or unless you're dumb and you want to play with 10 and be handicapped against the defense. But back in 2015, total number of players to take at least one snap for the Steelers on offense was 28. You follow that up in 2016 pretty consistently with 27. In 2006, when you get to 2017. In 2018, that lowers to a very healthy 24. Okay? 2019, last season, when we named a bunch of names that didn't even get on the field, like Paxton Lynch, J.C. Hassenauer, Patrick Morris, Amara Darbo. Without even those names, I'm going to go through all the names that played a snap right here. Tyson Alualu, believe it or not, got one snap as a fullback in the Ravens game. People may have forgotten that. Zach Banner, Tony Brooks-James, Deion Kane, James Conner, David DeCastro, Trey Edmonds, Matt Filer, B.J. Finney, Ramon Foster, Zach Gentry, Xavier Grimble, Duck Hodges, Johnny Holton, Deontay Johnson, Tevin Jones, Vance McDonald, Dante Moncrief, Chuks Okorafor, Roosevelt Nix, Marquise Pouncey, Ben Roethlisberger, Mason Rudolph, Jalen Samuels, Juju Smith-Schuster, Benny Snell, Ryan Switzer. We didn't even bring his name up. He gets hurt in Week 10 and is out for the season, for the rest of the year, missing 6 games. Nick Vannett, Alejandro Villanueva, James Washington, Kareth White. A total of 31 players compared to 28, 27, 26, 24. 24 the year before, 7 additional players plus maybe another 4 or 5 that were active on game days and could have gone in. Wow. I mean, you go from 7. Now, there may have been a body or two in 2018 that were active and then they just never played. Well, for example, Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs did play. So he would have been part of that 24. So I can't even say that for example. But Mason Rudolph wasn't active. I don't think he got a helmet the entire year. So, we're talking about guys that even got helmets. You have 7 additional players take a snap and as many as another 5 for a total of 12. Let me add that 7 to 31. 53-man roster. 53-man roster, right? Okay. You have 3 specialists. You have a long snapper, punter, and kicker. So that brings you down to 50. So if you even did an even split between defensive and offensive players, that would be 25. They had 31 guys take a snap. That's unbelievable. And we said another 5. You could have had as many as maybe 36 or 37 guys probably take a snap. It's phenomenal. It's like a whole other. That's like almost another football team that you're putting out there. It's like playing like I don't know, like those scrimmages where you have guys black uniform against gold uniform, and you're matching them up. That's essentially what they're pulling out here. That's kind of why they have 90 people in training camp. You don't have 90 people during the season to just pick and choose and get bodies out there. You got to manage all of this. The 31 players to get to 8 wins. That is truly, as you said, a commendable job by Mike Tomlin and his coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here, like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say that this was an amazing performance, because at the end of the day, it was a very anemic offense. It was a very painful offense to watch at times, but it's all relative to what you had to work with. Essentially, it's the equivalent to being a high school coach and half your varsity goes down and you're playing freshman JV backups, by the end of the season going into the playoff run. You're going to expect what you get. And I'm not trying to belittle these players by saying that, they're comparing them to a freshman JV offensive lineman. But in terms in the NFL, when you have your starters go down, you're going to have a massive drop in skill level and production, especially when they're just thrown to the fire. They had no real prospects of playing. And, there's the whole mantra that Tomlin uses, next man up, next man up, and then the next man, and then the next man. It carries you so far. That's really, in my mind, only really truly applicable for the first couple guys, and then after that, it's all man for himself, and you can only expect so much productivity from that. And when it's all said and done, the Steelers got about the productivity you should truly, honestly, in your heart, expect to get from some of these players. That's no bash on them. That's just the situation was not desirable for them to be truly productive in that landscape. You want to see guys, have an entire starting lineup, and then maybe your third stringer has to come in at one position, but the entire starting lineup's still there to give him support and elevate his play. Now all of a sudden you have that undrafted free agent or that third stringer playing beside a second stringer, playing beside a guy who wasn't on the roster. And now we're going to expect him to still perform like Ben Roethlisberger, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Heath Miller. You name whatever player you want to. It's not feasible to genuinely expect that. And I think that's why a lot of people, myself included, believe that if the Steelers stay as healthy as they can, healthier than last season, and go back to the standard of a couple of guys missing here and there, there's no reason to really not feel as though that on paper they shouldn't be an improved team from what we saw last year, because even at his worst, a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster is still going to be better than Amara Darbo. At the end of the day, even at his worst, James Conner is still going to be better than Tony Brooks-James. At the end of the day, Ben Roethlisberger, without his elbow, is still going to probably be better than what we saw at times from guys like Duck Hodges. That's just the reality of it. And you have no reason to not expect an influx of potential with this team, especially whenever the defense hopefully continues playing at the level they are, with the only true major loss being Javon Hargrave. You're hoping they're going to keep playing at a swarming level. There's reason to be excited and to hopefully finally put 2019 behind us, because it was such an unusual circumstance that you never, as a coach, as a GM, as a player, want to see happen, because that just puts so much more stress on the already weak parts of the roster to perform, and puts all this pressure on them to perform. The fan base starts turning on them. It's a very undesirable situation to be in that you never want to see happen for a team.
Yeah, and I try not to say the cliche absolutelys that we like too. So, and it's just one of those things, man, where, I don't want to get too long in the tooth here as we are already up against it, but what else can you say with having that's the reason why you see it's aside from the players themselves that have their own struggles, their own uphill battles. I think if you give Mason Rudolph no injuries during the season and you give him a full complement of a healthy Connor, healthy Juju, a healthy offensive line, no one suspended, et cetera, maybe you see a lot more growth. Maybe you don't see that many mistakes. Maybe you have a completely different perception of him. Maybe you have a completely different perception of a lot of other guys such as Juju or James Conner as well. And you certainly would have a different perception if the franchise quarterback doesn't go down, because that was already the death knell for the season. That's week 2. Stick a fork in them. They're done. And kudos for Mike Tomlin and company for not giving in so easily. So, Zach, you give in too easily far too often. Thanks for joining me, man. We have another good one on our hands here. So I hope everyone's out there ready to like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Always good to get some venting out of the way and kind of put things in perspective. I'm a very by the book, straightforward guy, so it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. So until next time, don't get it mixed up. My name's Joe. His name's Zach. We encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.